Across Canada, our children are being exposed to the toxic trans agenda, both through SOGI, the sexual orientation and gender identity curriculum in our schools, and through drag queen story hours, held at our public libraries and often financed by our civic governments. And sadly, despite the proven harms of this messaging to our children, very few people protest. But some do. Calvary Pastor Derek Reimer has been persecuted by our courts for the past 2 years for peacefully speaking out against drag queen story hours in our libraries. While I myself am not a lawyer, as far as I can tell, Derek has committed no crimes, either under the criminal code nor our Constitution. Despite this, he has spent a total of 43 days in prison and has now been sentenced to 1 year of house arrest. I had wanted to do this interview with Derek in person at his home, as we both live in Calvary. Derek informed me that under the terms of this house arrest, he's not even allowed visitors. And so Derek joins me today via Zoom to bring you the whole story. Everything that has happened since his first viral video where he was assaulted by parents at a Calvary library to now, where the Crown is seeking to overturn a previous acquittal for another instance of peaceful protest. What media coverage there has been of Derek's persecution by our courts has been fragmented. This is the whole story, from February of 2023 until now. Derek, thank you for taking your time for this interview. I know you've done a number of interviews on this, but I'm hoping today that what we can do for people is give them the full story, everything that happened. So thank you again for your time.
Thanks for having me.
And I'd like to let's start with that. I think maybe where we need to start, because this video has been circulating on the internet. Some people have seen it, some people haven't. What we're going to show you right now, folks, is a very short video where Derek was physically assaulted by parents at the Seton Library in Calvary. He was thrown out for peacefully protesting the Drag Queen Story Hour. So let's run that video now.
We are now calling the police. We have the police coming, so it is your choice to leave or deal with the police.
Very abusive in there.
We are going
For
to...
love is love.
Hey,
love
guys.
is like very hateful, very abusive.
Why are you disrupting the program?
Because it's wicked.
You guys, okay. As a parent of kids in there, you need to get out.
Why are you so uncomfortable with the Because we don't even stop the program. We aren't supposed to be homosexuals and transgenders. Those that do this will not inherit the kingdom. No, we're not going to take this outside. We're going to stay right here. This is freedom of speech. I can speak as I please, and I can speak my religion. And what happened in there is abuse, right? And they physically threw me out of there, which is all recorded. So I'm happy that their faces are recorded. Okay. And now I'm asking you to leave, or else I'm going to arrest you for trespassing. Okay. Understood? Are you leaving? Otherwise you'll arrest me? Turn to Jesus Christ. Today is the day of salvation. Now is the time.
So now that everybody has seen that, but that's just a small part of the story, Derek. This has been going on for a long time. There's been court cases. There's the judgment. The reason why we're doing this, and I should mention this, folks, this is important. Derek and I are both in Calvary. Now, he's been sentenced to house arrest. When I spoke to him, I offered to go to him so that we could do this interview in person in his home. However, I can't do that because you're not even allowed visitors, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So let's start this whole story at the beginning, Derek. Where did this all start?
This started in December of 2022. I went to my first drag queen protest. It was a freezing cold December day, and we actually had decent numbers out. I'm not entirely sure who organized it. I have my suspicions, but after standing there and protesting and preaching and holding up my Jesus is Lord banner, I just thought, you know what? It was just in my heart, like the Lord put it into the heart of Nehemiah to build the wall, that this needs to be more frequent. This needs to be organized. We need to protect the children. We need to preach. We need to rebuke. And we need to, most importantly, expose this darkness that's happening right here in our city. And not just our city, but as you know, our country and all over the world. So I did exactly that. I started calling people, sharing what the conviction that was on my heart. And we started to protest these events. So as you saw at that video, that was the Seton Library protest. That wasn't our first one. I'm not exactly sure, maybe second or third protest at that point. But these protests started to become very effective. It garnered the ire of our mayor here in Calgary, Jody Gondek. The bylaws weren't severe enough, so she went on a Twitter tirade saying how there needs to be more severe consequences. I wasn't arrested at Seton Library, that protest, until she did her Twitter tirade, and then cops showed up at my house and they had arrested me. So going back to that protest with that video that went viral, we were there with other protests. We had been outside and just had, essentially it's a church service. We have somebody singing. We'd take turns as preachers, preaching, rebuking, inviting people into the gospel of Jesus Christ and to start a relationship with Jesus, exposing the sin and the darkness, like I mentioned. But I thought, instead of being just outside, why don't we actually go inside? Let's be bolder. Let's take it indoors and see actually what is transpiring, what's happening in our libraries. So we did that. And then 3 of us, we went in, and it was determined that a friend of mine would go in first and then rebuke it. And if she's kicked out, then another friend will go in and then rebuke it. And if they're kicked out, then subsequently, then I would go in. And that's exactly what happened, in order, in turn. When I went in, I walked in, I was watching, I was observing what they were doing, just singing songs, reading books. And I stood there for about 45 seconds to a minute. And I just walked in. In court, they said that I was pushing and I was shoving, trying to get in. No, I just walked in normally like anybody else. And I just started with my normal kind of preaching and my rhetoric of exposure. Just, parents, don't expose your kids to this perversion. Turn to Jesus. He's the way, the truth, and the life. This type of talk. It wasn't long. And I walked to the front of the room where the performer, the drag king and queens were. And I was preaching in the front there and rebuking it. And some parents had grabbed me physically, 2 or 3 men, and they started to drag me out of the room. And I'm clutching at the walls, and I'm just trying to keep my balance and stay on my feet. And I'm grabbing at whatever I can to kind of stabilize myself. And unfortunately, there's not a lot of video evidence, if you will, or video footage of me inside that room. But then you see with the video where they aggressively and violently, they throw me out. My head actually bangs off the glass door and I fall to my back. But you know what? That doesn't surprise me. A lot of these individuals, they accuse us of being hateful and violent and aggressive. And what I'm thankful for that video is it's starting to expose that group is exactly what they are projecting onto us as Christians. So I just got up from my back and I started preaching and rebuking it, or just continuing in that manner. And it was my conviction to do that. And it's my right to do that. Freedom of speech, freedom of religion, expression, peaceful assembly. This is a public library, and I am the public in essence. And I'm not okay with this public event in a public library. So I can say something. Absolutely. So I'm exercising that right. And not even just our earthly rights and the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, but my godly convictions of what the Lord's sending me to do. So I did that. Library manager, security, they're asking me to leave, but I'm not taking any authority of the library seriously. The only authority that I'll take serious is if a police officer shows up and says, hey, you know what? You have to leave, you're trespassed, otherwise you'll be arrested. And that's exactly what happened. I preached and I rebuked, until a cop got there. And I left. I left peaceably. I left willfully. He didn't escort me out. He stood there where the event was taking place. And I just walked out while still preaching and letting everybody know in the facility what was taking place. So it was just shortly after this, I was at my house. I got a call from the hate unit's kind of operation, hate crime. And they had informed me that I need to come in. I need to kind of turn myself in. We need to have a talk. I'm like, oh, what do we got to talk about? Well, you're going to be charged and we need you to sign off on some papers. And so we need you to come in as soon as possible. And I said, I'm not going to come in. And like, you do what you got to do and I do what I have to do, but no, I'm not going to come in. And I don't think I could get a hold of my lawyer. I'm not sure exactly, but I didn't want to go in. Cops showed up at my door a few days later. And I think again, and they wanted me to come in. I said, no, I'm not going to go in with you. And I said, again, just kind of do what you got to do. And I'm doing what I got to do. That was the point in which I couldn't get a hold of my lawyer when they're at the door.
Okay.
And that's actually video footage that Fox News had showed, as this had got a lot of media attention at that time. So there was a warrant issued for my arrest. And Rebel News is hanging out waiting to get the story. And I was on actually a prayer walk, and then the cops had apprehended me. They arrested me for the first time. I went to jail for the weekend, and I was released on bail. So just to kind of bring it back to how effective these protests were, because, man, have I heard every Tom, Dick, and Harry and every Christian say, well, I don't agree with your methods. I would have done it this way. I would have done it that way. And that's great. Do it that way. The Lord had told me to do it this way, and it was very, very effective. And this is how effective it was. Did you want to jump in?
Yeah, just before we continue, I wanted to ask a question. You declined to go to the police station. You said to them, I'm not going to do that. What was your reason for that?
Yeah, the main reason was I couldn't get a hold of my lawyer. This was 7:15 in the morning. The cops had woke me up, and my lawyer wasn't answering my call. And I wasn't sure what was happening. Without legal counsel, I didn't feel comfortable going to a police station.
Okay, but then the first time, a few days before, when they called you and asked you to come in and you refused, what was your reason for refusing?
Maybe we can correct that, because it's already 2 years ago. I think they came to my door, and then I think I called them later to confirm, do I have a warrant for my arrest?
Okay, so we just had a sequence of events wrong here. The first interaction you had was when they showed up at your doorstep at 7:15 in the morning. You couldn't reach your lawyer.
Yes.
And so you didn't want to put yourself in a position of not having legal representation if you were arrested for who knows what. All right, so that makes sense. Okay, so now please continue from that point.
Right, so they showed up at the door. I didn't go with the police. I called later on to verify, hey, do I have a warrant out for my arrest? He says, yes, you do. So now we're just waiting. I'm waiting for when the cops are going to pick me up or they're going to show up. So they arrested me in my neighborhood when I was on a prayer walk, went to jail for the weekend. And so now to bring it back to how effective these protests were. There was an event called Chinook Blast that happens every year in downtown Calgary at Olympic Plaza. We had planned to protest it. We had put it online. And the city had actually canceled this drag on ice event because they were afraid for people's safety. They were afraid of the protest and the attention that it was going to get. So they canceled it. A police officer went on the newspaper and he made a statement saying that already up to that point, 14 drag shows had been canceled. So it'll be 15 with that Chinook Blast event. And it was just incredible. For a matter of like weeks or a couple months, we had shut down at least 15 drag events that we know of. So moving forward, I continued to protest. I continued to show up and trying to abide by my conditions. And in my mind, I was abiding by my conditions, standing 200 meters back at this time. That was the condition. And so I got arrested again. They had said that I was too close. I went to jail for another week or so. I got released on bail. And also just where the name Exposing Darkness came from. I had an interview with CTV and I was praying like, Lord, what do you want to call this movement? This is your battle and this is your movement. What do you want it to be? And the Lord just put it on my heart, Ephesians 5:11, which is a verse that I often use, and have no fellowship with the unfruitful works of darkness, but rather expose them. So exposing darkness was on my heart. So we had officially branded and named this movement, this protest movement, Exposing Darkness. And we continued. We had a protest after I got out of jail again. And this time I was about 800 meters away from the library. They had had stricter stipulations. It was technically 300 meters, but I thought, you know what, I'm going to be at this intersection far away. I'm going to be just preaching, kind of exposing, and just a public awareness of what is happening at the library just down the road. And at this time, that was the Saddletown Library. And that was the third time I got arrested. And I was completely clueless. I didn't know why I was being arrested. I was saying, I'm nearly a kilometer away. I'm definitely not breaching this time. What is the problem? The officers were not letting me know what was happening. And it was frustrating. So being arrested 3 times in 5 weeks, I spent 43 days in jail. And with the third arrest, that was for having a disagreement with the library manager. So instead of just being on the outside of the venue where the drag queen story hour was taking place, and then not even just being inside during the time of the event, because I wasn't allowed to be there at the time of the event any longer. So I thought, okay, we had gone the day before, we had protested. Now let's talk to the manager maybe the week before, the day before another upcoming drag event. So again, getting bolder and bolder and just wanting to do more and work within the parameters of my conditions. I went to Saddletown Library. I just asked for the manager. I don't know who it is. It's not about that specific person. And the court made it out to be like I had targeted this individual. And it's like, no, not at all. The only target was, who's the manager? Who's in charge? I just want to talk to them. I'm the public and I'm in disagreement. I'm not okay with my tax dollars funding this type of event, and I want my voice to be heard. The last time I checked, you can do that in Canada, and you still can, despite what happened with my case.
I'd like to jump in here and say, well, let's run that video as well of your conversation with Shannon. I had her name here. Let's not worry about that. Shannon something. She was the manager at the library. You had a conversation with her. You were very clear in your opinion, but you were calm. You weren't in any way threatening. And I think people should see that. And as you said, this wasn't during the event. This was prior to the event where you just went in to talk to somebody, some manager in the library.
Hey, how are you? Hi, I'm Derek Reimer.
Oh, hi, Derek.
Nice to meet you. I'm just inquiring about Reading with Royalty. There's events going on here.
Not today. There's an event going on next week. It's a registered program.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's your full name, Shannon Slater. Do you think it's appropriate to have, pervert grooming sessions going on here, corrupting children?
I find that really offensive. We offer programs for children. Right. We focus on age-appropriate programs. Right. And I'm not going to have a conversation.
You know what I find offensive? Corrupting kids.
Yeah,
that's what I find offensive.
This conversation is over.
And we're going to make this public, and your name's going to be out there, and that's not going to be good for this
you are
library.
Welcome to threaten me.
It's not a threat, but we want to hold you accountable. People that are hosting these pervert grooming hours.
I'm going to ask you to leave.
I'll leave. That's fine.
Yep.
But you need to be held accountable for the choices that you're making, and that's not okay. Right? So that offends me, just like you said you're offended. That's okay. But we're offended by the corruption of kids. But we'll be back, is what I'm communicating, if you continue to have these events. And I don't think you want that kind of attention. I don't think that's good attention, right? For you personally, like with your name and this library, I don't think you want that all over the place. I'm just saying that it will be. Okay, God bless.
Yeah, exactly. And our interaction lasted about 90 to 95 seconds. I just asked for the manager. So she approached with kind of like her right-hand man, a big guy. Maybe she felt a little bit uneasy. And it's okay, we're not coming there threatening violence or anything of that matter. And I'm a pretty loud guy. I'm a street preacher, and I'm used to making a scene. I'm preaching loud, and I'm not afraid of police. A lot of interactions with them as well. And this is my life. But that was not my objective that day. My objective, you can see in the video, I just wanted to have a conversation. I just want to talk quietly and just about that. Hey, I want to express myself of where I'm coming from. So in the video, you can see, and I just said, hey, I want to try to have a bit of small talk so we could kind of ease the tension, because I could feel that immediately. And she wasn't really participating in that small talk, and that's okay. So I just kind of cut to the chase, and I just said, yeah, hey, do you think it's okay to have this pervert grooming sessions, as I referred to them as? And she was very offended by that. basically then just saying the conversation is over, and that's okay. I'm not making a fuss and yelling and screaming. I'm not there for that. There's a time and there's a place for some of that, and it wasn't then. So I just walked out and I said, okay, well, we'll be back. And what I meant by that, see, the court just totally blew this out of proportion. And what I meant by that was exactly what we've been doing the last couple months. Be back to peacefully protest and peacefully assemble, because that got a lot of media attention. There was a lot of power in that and exposing this. And that's why I said to her that, hey, this isn't going to be good for you personally or this library. Basically, when we expose this and when we gather outside and media show up and cops show up and counter protesters show up like that, basically that's going to be uncomfortable for you. Like, so let's think, like, why are we really having these events here? And I want to show, like, the public, a lot of the public, I don't think was aware of it. So we're a bit of a whistleblower. We're trying to wake everybody up, definitely wake the church up. And just, this is going to be uncomfortable again when people are aware of this, and we're going to be outside, and then we're going to be making some noise. Then we're going to be on the microphone, the bullhorn. Then we're going to be singing and preaching and using some strong language to expose this and to identify the behavior that's taking place within this library. That's all that it is. That's all within our rights. So what's completely ridiculous is in court, my lawyer asked the library manager, so how did it make you feel when Reimer approached you and he expressed himself to you? She says, well, it made me feel upset. So later on, in examining her, he says, okay, well, how did it make you feel? Again. She said again for a second time, well, that made me feel upset. My lawyer went online with a public statement that was actually played at our sentencing hearing, where I think he was a little bit felt sideways about it, but I loved it. I thought it was excellent. In front of the judge, in front of the crown, saying this does not meet the threshold of criminal harassment because somebody feels upset. Like, if that's the case, then we're all guilty of criminal harassment at some point or another. Like, this is a complete joke.
I saw that statement from your lawyer. It was very well stated. He made it clear that criminal harassment, and he defined it, he's a lawyer, so he can do this. It means that you've been tormented, chronically harassed, chronically worried. And then he said, and this is a direct quote, and you kind of quoted this in a moment ago, it says, he said, if it's criminal harassment to upset someone, we're all guilty. And I think another point that needs to be made here is that Shannon refused to file a victim impact statement.
That's right.
So clearly, it wouldn't have been that bad from her perspective. All she said was, well, it made me feel upset. Well, any conversation we have with somebody whose views are diametrically opposed to ours can often make us feel upset. That's just society. That's just people talking to each other.
Well, exactly. And that's why I'm very disappointed in the courts, and even firsthand of seeing how corrupt the courts can be and how they're influenced by a political bias. You know, my lawyer used to be a Crown prosecutor, and he said, Derek, they just kind of make it up as they go. I've seen it. And he said this is basically a David against a Goliath here, because this is so politically fueled and charged. So it was wild to sit there and watch how the judge had fabricated and jumped from kind of point A to point B of her saying that she was upset from the library manager's actions of privatizing her Facebook to like friends only, or shutting down her LinkedIn account, and just being a little bit maybe apprehensive and looking over her shoulder at work, like seeing if there's going to be other protesters or people who disagree with her. Like, this is crazy. So she rendered from that Shannon Slater was then fearing for her safety, that she was now intimidated by me. And I went in directly, that I had gone there for her to make her fear for her safety and to intimidate her. That was the words that the judge had used and determined. It's not what she had said, Shannon Slater, the library manager. She never said that. The judge had made that up and determined that by these little behavioral tweaks, because she was a little bit uneasy about our conversation and that some people are disturbed by this and want to say something. Like, what country are we in? Like, this is Canada. This is completely absurd and ridiculous how we can't have a conversation, disagree, and someone has to be fearing that they're going to be charged with criminal harassment and go to jail or be on house arrest for a year.
Right. And I want to make a very important point, building this up that you said just a couple minutes ago, that this is politically motivated. For people outside of Calgary watching this, the rest of the country, you and I can both attest to the fact that our mayor is one of the most woke leftist mayors, not just in Canada, in the world, probably. Jody Gondek is an absolute disaster. You said politically motivated. What people need to know is that these drag queen story hours are funded by the city to the tune of $20,000. They're paying for this indoctrination of our children, while the courts silence people like you who protested.
Yeah, it's completely outrageous, and there should be an outcry from the public over this. And this is just not a battle exclusively for the Christians. This is anybody with a moral backbone, with a moral compass that sees this corruption of kids. And it's like, no, this needs to stop. We have to, like you said, you have to stop using our tax dollars to fund this sexualization of children. So bringing it back to the court case here, despite 22 months on bail, despite 43 days in jail, but they divvied that up because they said, well, these are different charges. Okay, sure. 32 days in jail for that opposing drag queen story hour to library manager. So despite that, actual jail time, and that's also with time and a half, because I'm in before being convicted, I'm in as an innocent man. They said, oh, that's not enough. Now he needs a year of house arrest. The Crown, he had asked for a year in jail and 3 more years of probation. These are like 2 separate sentences. I've been in the jail system before. My old life, I had a radical just transformation in Jesus Christ. So I know how it works. I'm familiar. 3 years of probation after a year in jail, that is insane. That's unheard of. So the judge comes back with her verdict, and she says, yeah, I agree with the Crown, but because of my kind of pastoral responsibilities, my duties, my life and my community service and with street outreach, etc., he can serve his sentence in the community. So they slap me with a house arrest, and almost the harshest, strictest house arrest you can have. I asked my lawyer, is this the most? And he says, the only thing more than this would be checking in with police, and you check in with your PO, but it's pretty close. I'm on a 24.
And I wanted to come to your house so we could do this in person. And you tell me, well, I can't do that because the condition of your house arrest is you can't even have a journalist come to your house to discuss what's happened. We have to do this via Zoom, despite the fact we live in the same city.
Yeah, nobody's allowed to come to my house. I asked my PO about this. Just before I lose my other train of thought there, I'm on a 24/7 curfew, like permanent curfew, unless I have a letter of approval from my PO to leave my house for purposes of religious exemption, obviously community service, going to work, an emergency, these types of things, a lawyer appointment. So I asked them, well, what about my wife? What if she has some friends over? Because another lawyer had recommended, hey, make sure to ask about this. So I thought, okay, that's wise. If my wife has friends over and cops come and knock on my door, so what then? My PO said, well, it would be up to the police's discretion of whose friends those are, and that would determine if I go to jail or not. Even though it could legitimately be my wife's friends, if the cops believe like those are my friends. So let's say you have a cop that supports the homosexual community and has a vendetta out against myself, then with their discretion, they could determine that those are my friends and I could go to jail for it. You might think, well, that's preposterous, that's corrupt, that's sideways, that's crooked. You guys have to understand that this is a very broken, crooked judicial system. I am seeing this and I'm witnessing it firsthand. That's why I appreciate coming on, that I can share what's happening in court. I can share how they're making up and fabricating the stories. And it didn't even transpire. It didn't even happen. The complainant isn't even saying the things that the judge is saying that I did. The judge is trying to get inside my mind of what I intended to do there, despite us peacefully protesting for 2 months. And you know what? I'm thankful that I had an opportunity to speak in court, and I prayerfully meditated and sought the Lord on what I could say, because this is a big opportunity to speak in court. But if I say things the wrong way, I could go to jail for it. And my lawyer had warned me about that. So I'm like, but I need to speak my heart, my conviction here. And I'm thankful that I did. And I basically had said, I defended myself, I maintained my innocence, and I corrected the judge saying, despite your verdict, it is incorrect that those are my intentions to intimidate her and make her fear for her safety. And I explained what we did. I had Facebook posts that were presented in the sentencing hearing. And I said, basically, that there's nothing wrong with that. And I said, what has happened to Canada? I said, me and all the gallery, all my supporters, I pointed at everybody. I said, we are concerned that we can't just talk to people and have disagreements without people going to jail for it. And,
yes.
And it was an incredible opportunity that I thank God for, that I could represent not just myself and my supporters, but all of Canada to a corrupt left-wing judge in the back pocket of Gondek, no doubt, saying, what is going on here?
Right. And people, our viewers, have seen the video now of your conversation with Shannon. Okay, she might not have liked your terminology, but you weren't yelling at her. You weren't threatening her. You were just making your viewpoint clear. And you're making a very good point, Derek. At what point in time did this country go so far off the rails that simply disagreeing with somebody else's viewpoint is now seen as harassment of some kind? People need to think about this. This is insanity, because it's a very, very slippery slope. It doesn't take very far from there before anybody says that upsets someone else, and anybody who's paying attention to some of the bills that Trudeau's pushing through will understand where I'm going with this, that just saying something somebody else doesn't like is now a hate crime.
Well, yes, it's totally insane. So going back to terminology and words that other people might not like or find offensive, Judge Fradsham, with my Seton Library case, which I was acquitted of, by the way, I don't know if we covered that, but with mischief and causing a disturbance, totally acquitted. But now the Crown is appealing that acquittal. So I'm going back to court. What is it? April 10th, I believe. And you know what? What's sweeter than beating them once is beating them twice. And I'm believing that we're going to stick it to them at their own game.
I'd like to make some comments about that Seton case, because once again, folks, we're referring to the video you saw earlier where Derek was physically assaulted, physically thrown out of the library. And a couple of things that are very important to note that did not happen. One, those parents were not charged with assault. In my opinion, they should have been. Now, maybe that's just my opinion, but you weren't doing anything violent. You weren't physically threatening anyone. They grabbed you and threw you out. Now, under my understanding of the criminal code in this country, that's assault. Could they call the police and ask for the police to remove you? Certainly they could. But they had no right to lay hands on you. That's a criminal act, and yet they were not charged. The second thing that is important to note that did not happen is that you were not charged with trespassing. And the reason is you were in a public space and you have a constitutional right to freedom of speech, to peaceful protest in a public space. So, they're appealing this, even though you were acquitted. What charges are they trying to get you convicted of?
Well, the original charges were the mischief and causing a disturbance. And kind of going back to my original thought, Judge Fradsham, with the terminology and people being offended pertaining to that, he said that, yeah, he rendered that some of my terminology and the words that I use could be deemed offensive. But he said, but that's not criminal. It's not about the words that I had used that defines or constitutes criminality. And it was more based off, did I cause a disturbance? Did I cause, did I kind of violate the organic flow of the event? And you can see in the background with the video that after I'm kicked out and as I'm preaching and rebuking and walking around, you can see that the event continues on. Because it continued on, they can't charge me with causing a disturbance because the disturbance didn't disrupt the flow. Where it if that whole event would have stopped, then they would have had more grounds. And this is what I've learned through court. But also with mischief, he had given an example of someone going and like tampering with somebody's stuff in their backyard. And he's tying it in that this is not also, it's not classified as mischief. And it came to this, that it was about It wasn't the content of my speech. It wasn't saying the words that people find offensive, but it came into the decibels and how loud I was speaking it. So I think that's really important for the viewers to know. It wasn't the content of my speech.
Right. So now speaking loudly is a crime.
Well, that could have contributed to that cause disturbance, which I was acquitted of.
Right. Now, I want to clarify something else. I have never been to the Seton Library, but I do know that there's many libraries in Calgary where they're in a public building, but the library does not occupy the entire space. So it appears to me from that video that after they physically threw you out, you were in sort of a lobby, a public area outside of the library itself. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's in a sports complex. So there's skating rinks and there's,
So after they threw you out, you did remain out in that public area for a while, but you weren't even in the library anymore.
No, I started walking out. The cop had asked me to leave the premises, to totally remove myself, and I complied. But I definitely let everybody know why I was leaving. And that there I was making a scene, and there I was talking and preaching loudly. And then I continued outside with the original protest, singing, preaching, and there's counter protesters there as well that we witnessed to.
Okay. So now you've been sentenced to 12 months house arrest with, assuming some exceptions, I believe you're allowed to go out to preach at your street ministry.
Actually, sorry to interrupt you. I'm not allowed to do, and that is something right now they're humming and hawing about. They're unsure. My probation officer is seeking approval of his supervisor. My probation officer even had admitted that, this is the epitome of community outreach. I don't see a problem with it, but I have to ask my supervisor because you're high profile. So whoever his boss is regulating my freedoms. It's not even this guy who actually wants to work with me. So I have a meeting with him this Wednesday, and I'm hoping and I'm believing that I'm going to have leniency to continue on, legally speaking, with my street ministry that I've been doing for nearly 9 years.
So right now, your street ministry has no pastor.
Well, I have people to help me. And, doing the will of God, that always comes first. And I'll just state that. But we want also the probation office, we want to work with them and say, hey, I have religious exemptions, and the judge ordered me 100 hours of community service. Again, this is the epitome of community service. So let's get on with it now. Let's sign off on that so I can continue on with my life. And when that does get approved, and I'm believing that, but it's not yet, my life will actually be exactly like how it was before, despite being on house arrest, because my life is of service. My life is of community service, of church, doing house church, doing Zoom calls and interviews, and I'm a family man. So that's fine. I don't even really have a big issue with that, other than the injustice that I'm seeing. Like, my lifestyle isn't really affected all that much, but it's wrong to find me guilty for opposing Drag Queen Story Hour, for verbalizing that, for expressing that. Like, it's wrong to charge me initially with going in and saying at a library, hey, this is wrong. This is a perversion. Parents, protect your kids from this. And we need to continue doing this. We need to continue exposing. We need to continue to be upset and bothered by this. And it's okay. You can be bothered by it. I still am bothered, and I still speak out against it.
There is a major stock market crash coming that will rival the crash of 1929. But there is a way to not only protect your wealth, but profit in the coming crash. The stock market chart today looks exactly like the charts prior to October 1929. Banks are disastrously over-leveraged, and several major U.S. banks have already failed. And the CDIC, the Canada Deposit Insurance Corporation, doesn't have nearly enough money to cover depositors. If you have money in the stock market, it is time to get out. Governments and corporations around the world are buying up precious metals in record amounts because they know the coming crash will make their other assets nearly worthless. You can buy precious metals at wholesale prices through New World Precious Metals at premiums substantially below other Canadian brokerages. And you can even transfer savings in your RSP tax-free. To get more information, use the link below this video to contact New World Precious Metals. They will answer any questions you may have. You may also wish to contact Adrian Spitters, a personal financial consultant who successfully predicted the stock market crashes of 2000 and 2008. You will find Adrian's contact information below as well. Finally, if you want more information on the coming crash and what you can do to protect yourself, your family, and your assets, see my most recent quarterly update with my team of financial experts at ironwillreport.com. By clicking the link below to contact New World Precious Metals, you will also be helping to support our efforts to bring Canadians to truth, as we are an approved affiliate partner. Right. Now, this 12-month house arrest, that's not the entirety of the penalties that have been leveled against you. What is the charge on which they are basing that sentence?
It's the criminal harassment charge with the library manager.
It's to clarify now, this is the criminal harassment charge we discussed earlier against Shannon, who said she was upset, and that's all she said. She refused to file a victim impact statement. The judge is the one who kept pushing to call this criminal harassment when even the person who I assume that Shannon was the plaintiff here. Who charged you initially for that conversation with Shannon?
Right. And that's debatable. I had heard, it sounds weird because I'm involved with this, right? But I've heard kind of rumors and I heard statements that she didn't even originally call the cops. I don't want to say that definitively. I don't know 100%, but we've raised that question. I have my suspicions, and I believe that she's just been used in this whole game as a pawn because the mayor, the cops, they want to shut me down.
Okay, but now, Derek, this is important. I'm not a lawyer, but I do know a little bit about the law, so I'm going to hammer away at this for a minute.
Yeah.
In this criminal harassment conviction, under the court documents, who is your accuser?
Good question.
You don't know?
I don't know. I would have to ask my lawyer specifically.
Has your lawyer advised you that under Canadian criminal law, you have a right to face your accuser? And they're not even telling you who your accuser is? I want to make sure I'm clear on this.
It's a good question. And I can't even answer with that question. That I don't know.
Wow. Okay. I'm sorry. I need a second with that one. Wow. So I just want to make sure I got this straight, Derek. You've been sentenced to 12 months house arrest on a conviction that the judge largely made up without the support of the supposedly offended party. And your accuser has not even been identified.
It gets worse, actually. During court, with this specific harassment charge, they needed repeated contacts directly or indirectly with this library manager. So, okay, they have the initial, the 90-second interaction that I have with her. I made a Facebook post about this library manager and the public library, and I explained, hey, this is what's taking place. This is what's happening in our libraries. If you feel as I do, and if you share these same sentiments or you're disgusted, you can call the public library. This is the public phone number, and this is the public manager who's in charge that you can talk to about your feelings. So they use that as an indirect contact to the library manager. And it's funny because as I was making that post, I was thinking I could tag her in it that it goes directly to her. And I thought, what? I'm not going to do that because this message isn't to her. This message is actually to my community and people that want to pay attention to this. So they use that as an indirect communication that added to the criminal harassment charge. And then this is the worst part. This is just unbelievable. They needed more ammunition, apparently. So they had a third party, this John Doe. I don't even know who this is. He messaged Shannon Slater saying, "Shame on you." That was it. No context or connection to me, just shame on you. They had actually amended the dates. So the dates in which I was charged in, they amended the dates and they had brought the dates back, I think a few days, to include this shame on you post. And they attributed that to me, that I'm responsible for this guy that messaged Shannon Slater, shame on you, is now Derek Reimer's fault and responsibility. That also, that piece of evidence contributed to me being found guilty of criminal harassment. So just to recap, 90-second interaction with a public manager at a public library about a public event. I make a post to my community about what's happening there, and you can call the public library, and then some guy just says, shame on you, and now I'm at home with a year house arrest.
May I point out the blatant illogic of that? I strongly doubt this will ever get to the judge, and if it did, that they would listen to this. But that is no different, logically, than saying that Shannon Slater is an accessory to a sexual assault by a trans individual because she's hosting these drag queen story hours in libraries.
Excellent point.
Wow. That mind-boggling. Okay. So I think we've covered the facts that have happened. So there's a few questions I'd like to ask you, Derek. Now, we've already determined you made this protest on public property, which is within your rights under freedom of speech laws in this country, under the Constitution. So as far as at least I'm concerned, you didn't do anything wrong. Maybe they didn't like what you had to say, but too bad, snowflake. That's just society. Sometimes people are going to disagree with you. But let's say that, let's turn the situation around. You run a street ministry. You're out preaching on the street, and a drag queen comes along, and they began protesting verbally against what you're saying. They don't like your faith. They don't like your viewpoints. What would your reaction be?
Under our laws and our freedom and our democracy, that's in the right to do. And I've had people all the time object. Like, I'm sure you can imagine, for being a street preacher and being out there every week for nearly 9 years, people are objecting all the time. They don't like my message. They don't like what I have to say, and sometimes can be aggressive and threaten even violence with me. So that's within their right in this democratic government and our freedoms with this country.
Okay. Now, I think we've covered this situation with Shannon very thoroughly. Let's talk a little bit about this incident at the Seton Library where you were assaulted by the parents because you had gone in and you were verbally protesting what they were exposing children to. And I want to make a statement right here, folks. I'm entirely in support of what Derek did. I wish we had more people like him, because he's absolutely right. This is an evil agenda. It is poisoning our children. So you get thrown out because you went in and you were speaking inside the library, but it's still public space. Do you, in retrospect, feel that you might have gone too far? That perhaps you should have stayed out in that lobby area?
No. In hindsight, I'd like to say I would have done more, but I knew I pushed this as far as I could. I know how the system works. And and I pushed. And like I said, even with trying to work within the parameters of my condition, I still got arrested 3 times in 5 weeks. And, looking back, I'm very happy with our accomplishments and our protests and how it stirred it up and what's happening now as a result of it. It's the Lord's battle, and I'm honored and I'm privileged to participate in that. And I rejoice in that I'm counted worthy to suffer shame for his name's sake.
All right. Now, to the extent to which you might be comfortable answering this question, how has all of this impacted your family? You're married, you have children. What's been the impact on them?
Yeah, it's tough. Like I said, in my previous life, I've been in prison. I've had a very colorful past and a radical transformation coming out of that, where my parents had been there through it all. So to watch me be involved in the system again, kind of in and out of jail, house arrest conditions, it's all too familiar. So yeah, it's uncomfortable to say the least, and not necessarily what they would have, but they understand my conviction and they support me and they stand with me. And I appreciate that. And not only that, it stirred them up to voice out. And my dad even said, we're going to start something here in Cochrane, Alberta, and we're going to let people know what's happening. We're going to raise money because I'm appealing this criminal harassment case. And he's like, we're going to let people know what's going on. They need to know, and they need to be aware of how corrupt these judges and these courts can be and how politically motivated they are.
Now, since we're on that, what is the URL for the support website?
I don't have an official one, but I am under a charity of Humanity's Promise. We've worked closely with them for years, where you can get a tax receipt. Another way is you can just e-transfer me at Derek, DEREK, at mission7ministries.com if you'd like to help out. Derek Sloan has also been helping for the last year and a half, almost 2 years, raising money, doing multiple interviews. I really appreciate him. And we just had an interview. So I think he has something set up, a program, so you can check that out. But even jumping back as well, with family, I just want to do even a shout out to my wife. We've been married, just over a year and a half, and she's been supportive, and it's been challenging and difficult at times. But again, she understands the convictions, and this is the Lord's battle, and she's just right there with me. And we have almost a 3-month newborn. So yeah, it's it kind of throws a curveball into it. From me being single when I started these protests, where it's just me and I go into jail and I just have me to worry about. But now, hey, if I go into jail over some kind of bogus breach, hey, that can affect the family. And I would actually be summoned before Justice Molly, who convicted me of criminal harassment. And she has the discretion of collapsing my whole CSO, my house arrest program here. And that means that I would go to jail till December 23rd. So the cops have been out to get me. There's even been some bogus warrants that my PO has said, like, I haven't been in court, and I had been in court. And so I've lost faith in the judicial system. I've lost faith in the police officers. Not saying that they're all bad, and I've had great dialogue with them, but I just can't seem to trust them. And the country seems lost and broken. And leaders that uphold godly values and principles, again, like this country was founded on Judeo-Christian values, we really need to return to that and uphold that.
Yes. So, Derek, I know you're comfortable talking about this because you haven't made a secret of the fact that you did have a checkered past in your youth. I believe between 2011 and 2015, you had 3 criminal convictions for violent crimes. I'm assuming 2015 or thereafter was when you had your Christianity conversion experience and subsequently became a pastor. What I wanted to ask, though, is in those criminal activities, you had interactions with the police and with our quote-unquote justice system. And at that point in time, and you freely admitted you were in the wrong. You committed crimes, and you've paid the price for those crimes, and you obviously now regret them, and you've become a very different person. How do your interactions now with the police, with our court system, compare to your interactions when you actually were committing crimes? Are there differences, or are you still being pretty much treated like a criminal?
I would say I'm treated like a criminal even more so now than I was before. I have far more interactions with cops now than when I was in a gang, drug dealing, in and out of jail, going to prison. So I don't even recall, and I'm from Winnipeg and southeast, Manitoba. So when I moved out here, it was just about a year or so until I became a Christian. But I don't even recall being familiar with too many cops or being known to them. But in Calgary, I am very known to police. I am very aware of who certain police officers are, and some I have great dialogue with, and I feel like I can trust them. But you never really know for sure, and that's what I'm talking about. It's unfortunate because I strive to build good rapport and relationships with the authorities. Romans 13 talks about honoring, respecting authorities, and I do within a point. And what it is that's under godly authority and authorities that are actually doing what's right and rewarding and honoring what's right and punishing what is evil is the context with that whole chapter. So I want to be at peace with all men, and I want to build rapport, and some cops I can, but I seem like I can, but it's just, you always in the back of your mind, like, are you just out to get me? Are you going to just arrest me? Are you just trying to do your job? Like we heard during COVID, and I was getting tickets for having my ministry out during that time. And who's your boss? Who's the ones that are just trying to shut us down? Is it you? Is it them? I got tired of thinking about that. And it's like, you know what? I have a responsibility to God, my calling, and even to love on these cops. And that's just how it is. I can't expect, Christian values and Christian demeanor and behavior from cops that are lost. So I try to witness to them along the way. Even one of the first times I was arrested, I was preaching, I was witnessing to the cops, and I was released by detectives an hour later. So I try to take these opportunities as I can. Right.
Now, you and I want to also know Pastor Artur Pawlowski, who also has a street ministry. Whether people agree with your Christianity or not, I don't think anybody can deny that both of you are living what you believe. Have you had a sense of disappointment in other pastors, in other churches that are not speaking out? They're not doing anything about this, when the Bible clearly says that, what's the quote? It is better to have a millstone tied about your neck and thrown into the water than to lead one of these little ones astray. And we know statistically that this trans agenda is damaging our children. We know that children who transition are far more likely to commit suicide. We know they're more likely to experience clinical depression. We know they're more likely to have difficulty forming proper, healthy relationships. So we know that these things are harming children. Are you disappointed that it seems like you and Artur and maybe a couple others are the only ones who are doing anything?
I'm incredibly disappointed. Now, first of all, I want to say that I understand that we're not all called to the same mission, and I get that. Although, despite that, doesn't mean that churches and pastors can't do anything. And I think what's disappointing, I was just talking to a pastor friend about this the other day, we've compartmentalized our callings. Like, oh, I'm pastoring this church, or I have a street outreach, or I just serve in this outreach, and that's kind of it. And it's like, oh, we're kind of tapped out. We can't do anything else. And it's like, where do we get that notion? Where do we get that idea from? And when we read through the scripture and we look at what a Christian needs to do and behave and to walk like Jesus, it's all encompassing. It's just, you can still have an office and a call, but you can still feed the poor. You can still be generous. You can still expose darkness. You can still have a say and opinion. And I think it's been a real kind of faux pas within the church of that we don't want to get our hands dirty. And I think a big part of that is the church is unfortunately under the thumb of the government because of charitable status. And if they speak out against these controversial issues like COVID, abortions, euthanasia, MAID, or drag queen story hour, they could lose their charitable status. So a lot of pastors, I would say, are fearful of losing that. And it's turned into like this golden idol. And I've lost charitable status by speaking out against COVID and talking about Jesus and how you don't have to fear COVID or wear masks and these types of things. And I've already paid the cost with some of it, and I've seen it, and I've experienced it. And so, again, going back to these pastors, I think the biggest component of their lack of inactivity in this area that bothers me is they don't even support it. Most of them don't even support. And it's like, that is the craziest. Like, if you don't want to be involved, you don't want to go and stand and protest like I did, and you don't feel like you're called to that, okay, there's still other ways you can be involved. But despite that, a lot don't even support me. I've had even one pastor write an article on the internet and Facebook posts. It's on his website, how he disagrees with me and how I could do things better or different, or how this isn't Christ-like, or these kind of things are okay, but these things aren't okay, and just kind of reprimanding me. And I thought, this is crazy. What has happened in Calgary? Not only what has happened to Calgary and Canada with the judicial system, what has happened to Calgary and Canada with the churches? Where are the pastors? Where are the Christians? Where are the people that are supporting? And there are. And thank God for that. And I come across them, but it's just far fewer than there are so-called professing Christians or just church attenders. And that is just so, it's sad and it's infuriating at times of like, maybe you're just false brethren. Maybe you're just not really lovers of Christ, because it talks about that to fear God and to hate evil and cling to what is good. We're not hating people, but the evil, man, we hate it. It's disgusting. It's an abomination to a holy God. We're to expose it. We're also to preach this loving relationship with Jesus Christ. But man, if we just talk that Jesus loves you and you don't talk about sin, you don't talk about hell or consequences or expose any of it, you know what people do? And I've seen this also firsthand at protests. They just say, God loves homosexuals, or God loves strippers, God loves whatever their sinful behavior is. They just say God loves us. And it's like, okay, well, yes, but that behavior is not acceptable to a holy God. And it requires change and repentance. And see, and the church doesn't talk about that a whole lot anymore. And,
right.
And I think that's also part of the problem.
Right. So Derek, as a final question, and you mentioned this early on in the interview, and you've just sort of made reference to it again, that not everybody is called to be as upfront in their protest of this as you are, but that doesn't mean they can't do anything. As an example, my wife was a Catholic school teacher for 27 years. She's now considering running for Catholic school trustee. And she called, when these drag queen story hours started coming to public attention, she called her alderman to protest, to say, look, I think this is wrong. So at least that's something. And if she becomes a Catholic school trustee, she'll have considerably more influence to shut down at least the SOGI in our schools. And I'm certainly hoping that's going to happen. So as a final question, okay, so there's a lot of people out there who very much object to this trans agenda, this sick programming of our children, this grooming of our children. But maybe they're not like you. They don't have the courage or conviction or whatever to walk into a library during one of these events and protest. What would you like to see people doing?
Number one is making people aware. And when we started this 2 years ago, I think most people weren't aware of what was transpiring in our public libraries and being funded with our tax dollars. So awareness, sharing the story, talking about the injustices, and allowing that kind of righteous indignation, if you will, and that violation of our rights. It's not just me, but this is all Canadians that are affected. Like, if this is a precedent that's being set, this affects everybody. So we need to do something. There needs to be an outcry. There needs to be action that's taken, even letters and phone calls, like you said, to your alderman, to the mayor. And just, we need to remember what they're doing to Canadians, what they're doing to Christian pastors, what they're doing to people that want to express themselves freely. What if you want to express yourself about something? Or what if some of the viewers, they want to express themselves and now everyone's a little bit scared? Oh, what if that happens to me like that happened to Derek? And seeing they're making an example out of me so that people are fearful and they're trying to bully people into silence. And it's like, no, we are not going to be silenced. This is Canada, where we have a democracy, where just as much as the homosexuals and the trans people have a right to speak their mind, well, just as much as the Christians and the Muslims and anybody else has a right to speak their mind. The atheists, anybody can, right? But that needs to be fair for everybody across the board. And you can't start now favoring one group over the other. You know, reading in these old articles in 2023 when we were protesting, it referred to the homosexual community, the trans community, these drag queens as this protected group. I think that's part of the problem. Why is this group so favored and funded and protected? That's an epidemic that's happening here, and this is problematic, and it needs to change. And, you know, there's strength in numbers, and that's why the more interviews that I have and the more that people talk about this, change is going to happen. Look what's happening in the United States. Look what happened with Donald Trump yesterday with the inauguration, and he's signing off that there's two genders, male and female. We need that in Canada. Canada needs to be cleaned up and straightened out, but it starts with you and I of, no, we're not okay with this.
Well said. And Derek, if you will provide me with the links to any more further information or how people can support what you're doing, we'll post those directly beneath this interview. Thank you once again for your time today. But most of all, thank you for your courage and conviction in opposing this, because it needs to be opposed. We need to save our kids.
Absolutely. And there's this one more piece here of information I want to throw in, that it reveals even the corruption of some of these judges, where they're not trying to help you stay out of jail. If anything, they're looking for reasons for you to stumble. My lawyer had wanted clarification on some of my conditions of like, what is interfering with a participant of a drag queen story hour event? What does that look like? What does that determine? Like, give us your interpretation, Justice Molly, of what that means exactly, because I've been found guilty over the wording of conditions where we understood it one way, but it was determined another way. So he wants clarification. That's a fair question. You know what she said? No. People won't believe this. I know it's like unbelievable. She said no. Like, I'm not going to clarify it. If Mr. Reimer breaches and is summoned then before the judge, which will be her, it'll be determined at that point. But I'm not going to give you a definition right now.
Which basically
unbelievable.
Means anything in the future that she doesn't like, she's going to consider that to be a breach of conditions.
He wants to remove the ambiguity. He wants to know exactly this, crystallize it. What is it exactly? How do you interpret that, Justice Molly? I am not telling you.
Right. Wow.
That's what we're dealing with here, folks. And it needs to change.
Social media platforms promote content based upon how many likes, shares, and follows they get. Please help us to spread the truth and take just a few moments to hit those like and follow buttons and then share this video to your own account. Truth is becoming ever harder to come by, but you can help spread the truth, and it will cost you nothing except a few moments of your time.